Hey, this is Josh Brown. Welcome to the Equip for Life podcast. Before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to let you know about a bonus episode that I'm linking to from this that you might want to watch or listen to after you've heard this interview with Robin Atkins. One of the things that we talked about was adoption and whether or not it's a good idea for sidewalk counselors to bring up adoption when they're talking to someone who is thinking about having an abortion. Since Jacob on our team created most of the content for the Sidewalk Counseling Masterclass, I asked him to review this episode before we put it out. And he 99% agreed with Robin, but there was like 1% area of disagreement. But also really kind of diving into that 1%. And it was a really fascinating discussion. I don't want to spoil it, but I'll just say they both changed each other's minds in certain ways, which was really cool. It was really cool to see two open-minded people just have. I just wanted to make a plug for you to listen to that bonus discussion after you've heard this episode, because if you're interested in this topic, or even you disagree with some of the things that Robin says, especially about adoption, which you very well might, this episode is very much swimming against the stream of the way most pro-life people talk about adoption. So you very, very well might disagree with lots of things that Robin says today, and that's okay. It's a part of an important discussion. But if you are interested in that, then I think the discussion that I moderated with Robin and Jacob does a really good job of diving even deeper into these very interesting and frankly, very important waters for pro-life people to be carefully considering. Now, without further ado, here is part one of a 3-part series with my new friend, Robin Atkins. Well, I am excited to be doing several episodes with a new friend of mine named Robin Atkins. And Robin, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll talk about kind of the funny way that we met.
Okay. I am a licensed mental health counselor. I have a private practice in Indiana, and I am also an advocate within the pro-life movement. And I came into the pro-life movement kicking and screaming, and if it weren't for them, I wouldn't be in it. Not that I don't love the pro-life movement or pro-lifers, but I am not a activist by nature. I'm kind of a let me just stay home and do my thing and ignore me. So,
I think a lot of like pro-lifers listening to the podcast could probably identify with that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I kind of came into the pro-life movement because I've had an abortion, and I'm a mental health counselor specializing in reproductive issues. So having had that experience and also working with women with all kinds of reproductive issues, you can't ignore the topic of abortion when you're doing all of that, and you're seeing that in your professional life and personal life. So I have that kind of side of it. And also just as somebody with a philosophy degree and really interested in ethics and medical ethics and bioethics, I figured I probably should have some kind of opinion on the topic. So now I do.
I mean, someone with both a philosophy degree and a lot of, counseling experience, specifically with this specialization, that just kind of makes you perfect for our podcast. Because there's so many interesting things that you can bring to this. So we don't talk about emotional aftermath of abortion very much because, frankly, I've been somewhat agnostic about, let's say skeptical of some of the claims that pro-life people make. And I haven't been super interested in even trying to find the truth somehow because, one, I'm not sure that I'd be able to figure it out without training. And secondly, because on college campuses, I haven't guessed that it would be super helpful anyway in my dialogues. And so we haven't talked about this very much, but you, with your philosophy degree, so you kind of know how to weed out bad arguments
right.
and bad research or whatever. I am so interested in all the things that you think about all of this.
Well, disclaimer, a philosophy degree is 20 years old. So any of the newer techniques I might not be aware of. But yeah, I have a classic philosophy degree, so hopefully it'll be helpful.
If philosophy goes back to Plato and Aristotle, then I don't know how much important stuff has happened in the last 20 years that would completely overturn everything that you had learned. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how you and I met, because there's something and it's going to kind of lead into our topic today. We're going to be talking about the differences between newborn adoption versus foster care versus, what's the other one?
Abortion.
Oh, abortion. Yeah, that too.
Yes.
And it's so interesting. You reached out to me a while back. Jacob and I had done a podcast that we released, I think, last year now. and we were talking about like multiple different kind of sidewalk counseling questions. We'd actually recorded it like 2 years ago, and then it just took us a long time to get around to releasing it. And I was worried about releasing this podcast. I was like, I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that I got hate mail from pro-life people, but I was like, I think this one I'm going to get some hate mail, because one of the things that we said that I'd never really heard other pro-life people say publicly was that, generally speaking, we shouldn't, like, sidewalk counselors shouldn't be jumping to what about adoption, like, right away in their sidewalk counseling conversations. Like, that is just something that Jacob has come to believe. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like, pro-lifers love adoption. And there's bumper stickers, adoption, the loving option, or whatever. Like, all these different, like, it just seems like this easy, simple alternative, I think, to a lot of pro-life people. So I put this episode out like, oh man, we're gonna bug some people. And I actually, in this case, only got one email that disagreed with anything in the podcast, and it was you. And so I started reading your really gentle, like really lovely, email, like, yeah, I've got some gentle pushback or whatever on this, and I'm expecting to read, I just feel like you're not giving adoption its fair shake. And no, it went the other way. It was like, you guys mentioned once that maybe sometimes you could still talk about adoption. I actually think you should never talk about adoption on the sidewalk. So it's like totally went the opposite way that I was expecting. But I was like reading this, I was like, I think she's right. I didn't even remember us keeping that. It was like an editing mistake. Like I didn't even agree. It was like, that's a really good point. We should correct the record on the podcast. So officially now, this is our view. You should never bring it up. But you're going to talk about why.
Yes.
So you have you've spent so much time thinking about adoption and how it works and looking into the research. I just think you have a lot of valuable things to tell pro-life people. I know that you and I have something in common, and that sometimes you make pro-life people angry with the things that you say. So everyone kind of buckle up. Try to get yourself in a calm, open-minded place, because I think you have a lot of really interesting ideas. And so talk to us about the differences between foster care, adoption, and abortion.
Well, let me preface this with a few things. One, I spent 4 years doing home-based therapy with the Department of Children's Services, so pretty familiar with foster care, especially on the mental health side.
What does that mean for the people who don't know what that means? Like, okay. What does that mean that you were doing for 4 years?
That means for 4 years I was going into people's homes, parents and children that had been separated by the foster care system. So I'm going into foster care homes and with the biological parents, going to meet with them. And my entire goal that 4 years was reunification. Not that I can make that happen, but trying to help the family and support the family in reunifying.
Got it.
So did that for 4 years. And then I've been specializing in reproductive health, including adoption and post-adoption complications for 5 years. So I have that under my belt as well, and a lot of IVF stuff too, but I don't think we're getting into that today. So I've worked a lot professionally and listened to a lot of the people that are actually going through these things, as well as I've seen the backside of how these things happen, and what's involved legally with those things. And I'm not a lawyer, so I want to preface that. I also want to say adoptive families are wonderful people.
Yes.
And just because I have concerns about how adoption is done or how the pro-life presents it does not mean that I don't think your adoptive family is legitimate or that you don't love your siblings or your children or anything like that. This is not a commentary on whether or not adoption is or isn't a good thing. It's just how do we present it and what are some other options instead of leading with that.
Yeah. I'm really glad you said that because like I know a lot of adoptive families. And I just think of them as being just very, very selfless. Like it is a huge sacrifice, I think, generally speaking, to do that. I know there's also a lot of emotional pain that can go into it and a lot of, the time that goes into it. A lot of times it might even be coming after a long period of infertility. And so, so there's no judgment coming from us on adoptive parents. It can also be true at the same time that there are certain patterns in the adoption system or ways that we talk about adoption, even as pro-lifers, that maybe should change.
Correct. So I want to just start with foster care and explain what that is and how it works.
Cool.
A very short explanation. So the intent of foster care is to reunify families. I'm not saying that's always what happens or that is always what should happen, but that is the goal of foster care. Adoption is not the goal of foster care. Now, it's meant to serve both the children and the parents, whether that's the biological parents or the foster parents. The goal of foster care is to serve all of those people. And I'm not saying it's done well all the time, but that's what its goal is.
And that's complicated because sometimes you've got people in there that don't have the same desires for what is going to happen.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. Well, and also, so case managers have incredibly high caseloads, and typically they're wonderful people, but completely overwhelmed with the amount of cases that they're trying to work. And the restrictions put on parents, or the requirements put on parents to get their children back, can often be prohibitive to that goal in and of itself. So if you're a parent that's told you have to have a full-time job, you have to be doing counseling with your children, you have to be doing supervision with your children, and you need to be attending all these court cases that happen during the day when it might be working hours. I mean, that's a lot. I don't know parents who haven't had their children removed that can fit all of those things into their life.
Yeah.
And so it's really sometimes prohibitive for that to happen. So I just don't think people are aware when they think, oh, these parents don't want their kids. I would say 8 out of 10, probably 9 out of 10, that's not the truth.
Wow.
Also, the opiate epidemic has been a big reason we have a huge boom in foster care cases happening. And if we're not going to address addiction in our country, we're not going to see that reduced. So it's not parents just don't want their kids, don't love their kids. They're fighting addiction.
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother thing that we don't have time to go into today, but I just want to make people aware it's generally not parents just hate their kids. Yes, there are parents that are abusive and neglectful, and that's something we have to address. Whether or not that can be fixed or not, it depends. But overall, that's not the average parent in foster care.
So I'm glad that you're talking about this because I feel like there's just so much shared ethos between us because not everyone is super naturally empathetic to people who are different from them, but we want to help pro-life people to be more empathetic. And so kind of naturally people talk a lot about empathy for people for women who have abortions and things like that. And that's a good thing. We should have appropriate levels of empathy for them. And you're talking about we need to probably generally on average have more empathy for parents who've actually had their kids removed from the home, especially when there's these kind of complicated things going on like opiate addiction. Like, don't just instantly be in your head like, ew, I just can't believe they're just such bad parents. They must be bad parents. Their parents, if the kids ever got removed from their home. You're saying like, no, there's a lot of complicating factors here. It doesn't make everything that those parents maybe have done like right or super healthy, but it's complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about it when I look at, so alcohol is legal.
Yeah.
And we have lots of parents that are alcoholics raising children that the foster care system doesn't get involved in at all. So it's like picking which drug is appropriate and which is not. Yeah. And I just think that's a complicating factor on how we look at people and have empathy for them. I also think being aware that, I mean, I've watched cases where the kids I don't think should have been removed. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if people know, it takes on average 9 months to get your kids back. Once they're taken out of your house. 9 months on average.
9 months.
9 months. And so I had a family whose kids were removed for the cleanliness of the home, rather than the state going in and trying to figure out how are we going to help them deal with this problem. We had a hoarder issue. Rather than dealing with that, we're going to remove them and then try to deal with it. So now you have kids placed in foster home for 9 months and the psychological damage done there before they can even get back. And that's not because there's that many hoops that take 9 months to jump through. That's how long it takes to get a court hearing.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Why? Why does it take that? Like, this is a really, really important court. Is it like literally the caseload is so high?
The caseload is so high. Yes. Yeah. And these judges aren't only just seeing those types. They're family law or family court judges. So they're seeing all different kinds of cases related to families. So, yeah, it takes 9 months to get a hearing. So it takes that long. And so you've got all of that damage, psychological damage done for the kids being removed when we don't. And so this is where it's kind of interesting when people talk about we need mental health professionals involved more with legal issues or law enforcement. There is some room for marriage there because there are a lot of times when people do just need some kind of support or community support when it's being done legally instead of mental health. So, yeah. So I just don't think people are aware that happens. I've also seen cases where kids should have been pulled and were not because the caseworkers had no place to put them. So it's a way more complicated thing than just bad parents don't love their kids.
Are there any obvious solutions to these huge problems?
Oh my gosh.
Like if we had more family judges, like would that help with the caseload problem? Like, are there any like ways that because this is like horrible and we all want to see a system like this get better.
So if you pull it out on a huge macro level, we would then also have to deal with community mental health because the average wait to get into community mental health is 6 to 8 weeks. So we've got
a lot can happen in 6 to 8 weeks.
Yes, a lot can happen in 6 to 8 weeks. And if you're already dealing with addiction and you're in jail and you get out and you have to have these services, but it takes 6 to 8 weeks to get into them, like there's so many issues involved in just this one problem that we really have to look at how is community mental health being done? How is our penal system handling these issues? How can we help in foster care situations, families stay together and implement services rather than removal in a lot of cases? So I think there's a lot of things. I think more foster care would help, but there's a whole slew of things that go into that, the regulations around foster care and how that works. I think more judges would help. I think removing regulations on who can provide mental health care and when. So I don't know if people know, but licensed mental health counselors or licensed professional counselors cannot take Medicaid. Like federally, we're not allowed to contract with Medicaid. So I do pro bono work because I can't take Medicaid, but that's half the counseling population cannot take Medicaid. So that's why some of the weight is so high. Now, if you're in community mental health and you're a licensed mental health counselor and you have a doctor that's supervising, you can. But if we go in then to caseloads, the average caseload for a community mental health counselor is somewhere around 75 clients. I have 24 and I'm full-time. Wow.
So respond to this pro-lifer that's in my head. Like, I mean, I think I have had a lot of ignorance about foster care. I'm sure that's true of a lot of people. So I am imagining a person right now listening to you that is feeling skeptical or suspicious or something like that because they hear you saying there's all these kids getting taken out of foster care, which to them sounds like, well, then that means that they were in a dangerous situation that the government would actually forcibly remove kids from their home. And you're like, there's a lot of like reunification stuff that needs to happen. Maybe even there are some ways that we can try to help these parents without removing the kids from the home. And they're like, yeah, but what if it's dangerous? So just like help them understand what is in your head that they don't understand yet.
Okay. So if a child's being abused, absolutely. We need to find a safe place for them to be. I would prefer that we with family or within their cultural community somehow. And that's part of a macro view too. We have a breakdown of cultural communities, but I would prefer it be in that than just removed and completely placed with some kind of culture or community they're not familiar with at all. So there's that, yes. And if they're being neglected, is this an issue of parents not having the funds to provide food, clothing, whatever? And can we address that first? Or is it intentional, willful neglect, which again, then we need to find them a safe place to be. So I am in no way advocating for kids to continue to be harmed just so we can make parents feel happy and cozy and good about themselves.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. I have gotten that pushback before too. Be like, you just want kids hurt. No, I really don't.
If you think that's what I'm saying, you're probably misunderstanding me.
Yeah. I didn't work in that field for 4 years to reunite them just to be like, I just want them hurt.
Right.
Yeah, no. I have 4 kids of my own. I don't want kids harmed.
Not correlative. Okay.
Yeah. So it takes years to go through the foster care system as well. So, 9 months minimum, 2 years minimum for adoption. And that's state by state. But like, for example, in Indiana, we have a law where fathers' rights cannot be terminated before 24 months is up.
Okay.
Minimum. And that's including if the father's in prison.
Wow.
Cannot. And there's a reason why that was put in, I think, was they wanted to encourage fathers to be more involved. So they wanted to keep them legally tied to their children for longer. But every state has their own. But in our state, it's minimum 24 months. Now, the one exception to that would be like safe haven babies, who I don't know if people know this. When a safe haven baby is found in a box, they go through the foster care system. Real quick,
for those who don't know about safe haven laws. I feel like a lot of people at this point know about this, but just in case, describe safe haven laws.
So it depends on if you're talking about the safe haven boxes where newborns are left in, or if you're talking about the safe haven law where anybody can drop a child off at like a fire station.
That's what I was talking about. Okay. So I don't know about the safe haven boxes.
Okay. It's a whole separate thing. Okay. So safe haven laws are, yes, you can drop your children off at a firehouse, police department, something like that. No questions asked. You can just drop them off.
A baby. There's like some age limit, right?
There's an age limit, and I think that's state by state too. Okay. I don't know. I think some states go up into elementary age, but I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
So in that case, I honestly don't know how much the state then looks into, are there other kids in the home, if they can find out who this person is or whatever. I don't know. I'm sure there are cases out there of the state like hunting these people. I don't know. Newborns can be left in places that have their boxes attached to churches or fire stations or police departments where they can put the baby in, and it's heated to an appropriate temperature, and there's an alarm that goes off to let somebody else know. And so in that case, it's really hard to, outside of like DNA, track down parents.
Yeah.
So in that case, those kids are still put in foster care, but they're fast-tracked for adoption a lot faster than the kids who have biological parents they can identify.
Okay, so I'm still trying to track with the difference because I've definitely had some confusion in my head. So you're going to help me with my confusion. So when I was thinking about safe haven laws, I was basically maybe imagining that generally speaking, whenever a mother utilizes the safe haven law, so she's going to drop her baby off at the fire station, I was imagining that there was like no paperwork happening at all. It was basically she's like handing the baby to hopefully to a person and not just leaving the baby in like a box outside in the cold. But like that's what's happening. And you're saying there's boxes of fire stations that are heated and stuff where that can happen. But then there's a different thing sometimes happening that's not that. And what does that look like?
So I don't know what states are doing what, and I don't want to try to claim that I know that's happening. I do know that if somebody goes, they have the right to leave their child and walk away. That does not mean they don't have a right to have their parents' rights terminated if they can be identified. So I don't think there is any paperwork that has to be filed or anything like that, but if they are identified, that doesn't mean they get to keep their parental rights for like whatever other children they have. So
I'm tracking with that. I'm glad to know that there's heated boxes. I mean, I was just watching my wife and I were just watching a show the other day that depicted a mom using a safe haven, like as a safe haven type thing that she does. She drops the baby off at the fire station, but like I'm freaking out because it's night and there's snow and I'm just like, oh no, I hope someone finds the baby. So,
well, there's not always boxes. Actually, I think it was started in South Korea. There's a really good documentary about these boxes. A gentleman in South Korea, I believe, started it. We have them in Indiana, I think in 4 locations now, but it's not nationwide. And there is some pushback on both sides of the abortion debate.
Let me guess. If we're making it too easy for mothers to abandon their children. Is that the pushback?
Yeah. So kind of the pushback I get from the pro-lifers is when I talk about when should we remove rights from parents and when we shouldn't. And they're like, but we have these safe haven boxes and we should always let them just walk away. And the pro-choicers I get is parents should be able to walk away at any point. We shouldn't be forcing people to parent, period.
That makes sense.
So
what is your response to those two groups of people?
In general, I think most people, if you said the statement to them, parents have a responsibility for caring for their offspring, would agree with that, just in general. And when we talk about, let's get a little nuanced in what does that mean, my overall response is, how is it we have a society where women are feeling like they need to do this? What are we all perpetuating in our own little corners of the world that says women need to feel the need to drop their children off in a box where they never see them again? Because that does cause trauma. I work with people who have been adopted or who are birth mothers, and it causes trauma to not know your family of origin. So I think there's some, again, macro level views of what are we all doing to create this idea that you need this out from parenting and that children are a burden.
That's really, really interesting.
What might help some pro-lifers that might want to push back on some of this is I come from a very child-centric point of view of they are humans too, they have rights too. And so every solution that we offer should be both about the child and the parents, not just about what are the parents' needs. And that's kind of something I like to say to pro-choicers too is, the children are humans too though, so we need to consider, do they have rights? Should they have rights? And if not, why not? What makes them different? So... it's interesting how you are making both groups uncomfortable sometimes. So, and speaking of that, so one of the things that you and I had chatted about in an email was also like toward the pro-choice side that there is damage that is done to the foster care community from the people who advocate for having abortions in response to suffering. So I'd love for you to talk a bit about that. Yeah. So I can't even imagine being somebody who grew up in the foster care system, having all of that trauma and suffering, and then being told, well, this is why we need abortion, because you would have been better off dead. And I don't think that is pro-choicers' intent to say that. I really don't think they're trying to like grift off the back of suffering to promote abortion. Absolutely. I just don't think that they've thought through this idea of like, are there more options than abortion to prevent suffering? Number one. And number two, we don't have any research showing that people denied abortion go on to become addicts or abuse their children or bad parents. There's just no correlational or causational studies showing that. The only study I've seen that has any kind of documentation on how people respond to being denied abortion is the Turnaway Study. And I have many, many, many concerns about the Turnaway Study. So
What is the Turnaway Study?
So the Turnaway Study is a study that was done at 30 abortion clinics across the U.S., where clinic workers would approach women after having an abortion and ask them this series of questions related to their abortion. And then they were followed up every 6 months for 5 years, and they were paid like $50 each time.
Who ran the study?
I actually don't know the name of the women running the study, but I know it was funded by Inersh.
Okay.
So, and I would have to grab what the acronym means. But basically, reproductive rights organization.
This wasn't a pro-life study.
No.
This wasn't David Reardon. Okay.
No. It was definitely funded by Repo Rights Center.
Got it.
So anyway, these women were then asked these questions. And what was interesting is they approached over 3,000 women. Just over 1,000 agreed to do it. Okay. At each then follow-up, they had more and more drop out. So at the end of 5 years, they had like 350 women left. So out of those 350 women, they say 95% of them do not regret their abortion. Therefore, no women regret their abortion.
Got it.
Which I have issues with how it was conducted. So you have clinic workers approaching women after abortion. I'm pretty sure there's a lot going on your face about how you might feel about that or body behavior. So and there was no like standard of how to approach, who to approach, when to approach. There was no kind of standards about that at least they've released that I've been able to find. And then what type of response is more likely to drop out of a study like that versus not? And so even some pro-choice organizations have agreed, like, it's probably women that regret are more likely to stop answering the phone about their abortion. Yeah,
that would make sense.
Yeah. So at the end, it was basically 17% of the people they approached at the end remaining in the study. And I don't think 17% or 350 women speak for the millions that have had abortions.
And remind me, the 350 were answering questions for how long?
5 years.
So, like, also at another level, and I push back if I'm wrong, but just like my assumption would be, knowing a lot of pro-choice women, that like a lot of women don't regret their abortion until after 5 years after the abortion. Like they wouldn't even, I wouldn't even expect all of those women to regret their abortion within 5 years.
Sure. I think the research I've seen is suggests on average 10 years is really when that starts to turn. For me, it took 20 to come to terms with the fact I even had one. So, and that's just one case. That's not a statistic. But I don't know that is an accurate look. I also think that how we ask these questions, there was very black or white questions, not a lot of like, so how do you feel about your abortion? What have been the pros? What have been the cons? Those were not the kind of open-ended questions that were asked. It was like, do you regret? Yes or no? Are you relieved? Yes or no? So when I talk about my own abortion, I am super, super grateful that I am not forever tied to the guy that was abusive. Right. That is a truth and a fact. Does that mean I'm happy about the abortion? Absolutely not. Completely regret it. The biggest grief of my life. But it's not black and white as far as women's experiences. Yeah. And I get a lot of pushback from debaters on like lived experience. Yeah, lived experience is not what we should be basing law on, but it is how we should talk about.
What is the pushback from debaters about lived experience?
That lived experience is not statistically accurate, which is somewhat true. You know, like my lived experience is not every woman's lived experience, right? So like we can't base law on Robin regrets her abortion. Right. We can also not base law on whoever over here doesn't regret her abortion. Right. We can't base law on lived experience. But how we talk about the topic or we debate about the topic needs to have some room for how does it actually impact women. Yeah.
And understanding that that's complicated and different women have different experiences.
Right. Yeah. I did a little thread on Twitter about how to talk to pro-choice women who don't regret their abortion because I see, so when we get into mental health and abortion, I'll be talking about the gaslighting of women that regret abortion, but I see pro-lifers sometimes gaslighting women that don't.
Yeah.
Oh, just give it 10 more years. Oh, you're just a horrible person if you don't regret it. Oh, you're going to regret it. Just wait. Like, no, that's her experience and we don't have to agree with the act. Right. But we also don't have to try to gaslight her to not be okay.
Right.
Like, I don't want her to not be okay.
See, like, I think like for a lot of pro-life people, they've been taught or they just have a foundational assumption that it is not possible to have an abortion and not instantly regret it. It's like, I hear language sometimes from pro-life, it's like, every woman knows. She knows this is a baby. She knows this is what she's doing. And then how could you go through that and not instantly regret? And so then if they assume that then any woman who says that she's happy she had the abortion, then the assumption is, well, she's lying. So she's like an activist type, a crusader type who's willing to say whatever. There's a lot of assumptions in there. Speak to some of those assumptions.
Oh my gosh. So I don't know how anybody could say this is the way you should respond to any given event. Like if we take it out of the abortion context, like parents whose child dies of anything, accident, whatever. Oh, they didn't react this way. Oh, they didn't react that way. Oh, do they really love? Like I just don't think that that's helpful.
Different people grieve different ways.
Right. Grief happens in a million different ways. My own grief experience for my miscarriage versus my abortion were very different. Yeah. And the abortion was much more complicated than the miscarriage. So like I don't think it's helpful to put on people how they should grieve. In general. I also think that, there can be relief after abortion. Is it relief that their child is gone? I don't know that that's really the relief they're talking about as much as I'm relieved that I'm not now looking at how am I going to pay my rent? Right. How am I going to provide for this child? Right. What about this abusive guy that I conceived with? Like there's a lot of things you can be relieved about that aren't, I'm also really super happy about my abortion. I have actually not met many women that come out of that are just like, woo, that was a great time. Can't wait to do it again. Right. It's just not.
But it doesn't mean that they're also like super regretful. Like, I can't believe I did this. I clearly killed my baby. Like, I don't think very many women walk out of Planned Parenthood saying that.
Well, I am on some abortion regret boards that are very private, and I'm not going to mention the names of them here because they get really harassed. But we have quite a few women day after coming on. Yeah, really
saying
regretful.
Saying things like what? What that you'd be willing to?
Saying things like, I want my baby. I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I could change that. And I think this is where we get into like abortion pill reversal and should this be a thing offered to women, which I don't think people maybe understand that abortion pill reversal is progesterone. That's all it is. And it was used to support several of my pregnancies. It is not dangerous. But should they have that option? Now, these are often women that have had surgical abortions and there is no going back. But yes, day after. And they'll say openly on these boards, like, I'm pro-choice. I think women should have that choice. But I don't feel I really knew going in what this is. And when people say, oh, but they know it's a baby. Cognitive dissonance is a very real thing. And denial is a very real thing. And we all have, so people could Google cognitive distortions. There's many, and we all have some. For example, one of mine is I tend to assume people are thinking poorly of me. That's just one of my cognitive distortions. But we all have them. And so this idea of like she knows it's a baby, somewhere inside, probably, or a human, I should say, somewhere inside probably. But when she's going in, she's not thinking about that. She's thinking about the guy that's abusive, the fact that I just lost my job, or I have 2 kids and I'm a single parent and I don't know how I'm going to feed them. Like the focus is I need out of crisis, not I need out of child. So when they come back the next day, it's, I've had 24 hours to think about this. Maybe there are other options for my crisis, and now I wish I could do my crisis with my child.
Yeah. That's so sad.
It is really, really sad. Yeah, I think how many kids are in the foster care system is not equal to how many kids that are available for adoption within the foster care system.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So, and how we get to adoption in the foster care system is different than newer adoption. Yeah. In the foster care system, you have families that can either foster to adopt, meaning I will keep the kids until they come open for adoption, and then I'm going to do that. You have people that are just, I only want to adopt. I don't want to foster at all. Right. And they tend to get a lot of hate around like, why do you not want to help these kids? And I think if you are not the type of person who can fall in love with a kid and watch them walk away, you probably shouldn't foster. Yeah. Because your goal should always be, I want you with your parents. If safe, if possible, I want you with your parents. So that's a really sacrificial, hard thing to do.
It really is.
Yeah. So I have no hate for people that are like, I'm just on the adoptive side. I can't do the fostering side. And so, but even when those kids are placed with the pre-adoptive family, there's still more court dates that have to happen. It's still about a year before that all gets finalized. In foster care adoption, parental rights are terminated. It's not the same closed as in there's no records of like who the biological parents were, but it is closed as far as there's no more communication with biofamily, period. Done.
Got it.
And even in some states, for the adoptive family to reach out to the biofamily would be a violation. So there's just like none. It's done. They've lost their rights. They cannot have contact, period.
And that's in the case of adoption?
Foster.
Oh, that's
adoption.
in the case of foster. Okay. Like, so there's the foster process. There's like a year trying to figure out, are we reuniting? Are we not, at least? And then at some point, if it crosses into from foster to adopt,
yes.
And now there's an adoption that's happened, that's the point where they might not even be supposed to interact with the biological parents.
And actually, during foster, the foster family is not supposed to interact with biofamily. Biofamily is not supposed to have foster families information or anything like that. Children are usually taken to supervised visits or regular visits by a third party or at a third party location.
Yeah.
So there is some of that, but they still see their bio parents during foster, usually.
Yeah.
Usually. But after adoption, no. Which is different than straight out newborn adoption.
Yeah.
So we can kind of flip over to that. So the foster care, the intention was reunite. Adoption is an attempt to dismantle the biofamily. That's the intent of it, to dismantle the biofamily and create a new adoptive family. It can be done in a lot of different ways. There can be open, closed, some kind of mixture of that, or a spectrum, I guess, of that. I will say in most states, it is up to the adoptive family whether or not it remains open or closed. That is not a legal thing. So adoptive parents can say, we're going to communicate X number of times with family, and they can see their child this many times a year. But once the case is closed, adoption happened, it's really up to the adoptive parents.
So that's interesting. So I think my perception has been that it was more up to the bio mom whether or not she wanted to pursue an open versus like a closed adoption. Like it was kind of up to her. Like, is this a situation where you might want to be in contact with these parents and be getting a picture of your kid once a year, or something like that? Versus, do you just want to walk away?
So when they're looking at profiles,
they
can specify, I want closed or open. The bio mom can, but then thank you for pointing that out. If she says she wants open, beyond that, she has no control how open that actually is.
Okay. Got it. So she's kind of like pre-selecting, like if she kind of knows I want open, when she's looking at profiles, those profiles are saying whether or not these parents are kind of interested in more of an open versus closed situation.
Right.
And so there's kind of a selection thing happening there. And then there's kind of a more of the choices or exactly how that looks. And so that's going to kind of transfer to the adoptive parents.
Right.
Got it.
And she can say closed to begin with. And in the future, if the adoptive parents are open to open, that can change. But it's really all in the adoptive parents' hands, what they will or won't allow. And some of that is due to if things get unsafe, they need to be able to stop things from happening or whatnot. But really, it's out of the bio mom's hands at that point. I think also people might not realize when you're an adoptive parent, you can pick and choose what kind of child you want based on any number of characteristics. Which is kind of interesting. It gets into a lot of different sociological issues and potentially touching on some eugenic type issues of I will or won't deal with a child of this race, this gender, these physical complications or issues. Like, and there's a lot of different reasons for that. And I'm not trying to say anybody should take, like, just whatever, give me a kid. I think there's a lot of reasons that go into those decisions, but I just don't think people are aware that can happen. And so I just want to let people know.
So when you say eugenic, so like the word eugenic, it's a big word, right?
I know. I probably irritated somebody already.
Probably. Well, I want to get you talking a little bit more about why you use that word, because here's what I heard you say was that let's just get specific.
Sure.
Let's say a white couple is pursuing newborn adoption, and they are choosing to not select a black baby. They're choosing to select a Caucasian baby for whatever reason. Are you attaching the word eugenic in any way to like that situation? And if so, what do you mean by the word eugenic?
So I think intention matters. I think that that's a really complicated situation because there's a whole movement on white people should not be adopting Black children within the Black community with valid concerns about are their children going to be aware of the culture that they were created in. So that's a valid concern. And so are they choosing not to do that because they don't feel prepared or adequately able to provide the child with what they need in relation to that? So I don't think that's necessarily eugenic in that, like, I am just not capable of doing this. But I think when we look at IVF, where you can choose which embryos you implant based on different factors, including gender, race, whatnot. When you look at, we can now abort based on gender, race. All of those have common themes to me of eugenics.
Yeah.
So I think intention matters. Is that the reason we're going in? Is we want to exclude that?
Right.
Or is it I am not prepared to adequately provide for whatever these things are?
Got it. Okay. So I think the reason that I bumped on the word eugenic a little bit is because I think of eugenics as being, and maybe I'm just thinking about the word eugenics wrong, is something like, when I think of genocide, like genocide is about ideally to the genocidal maniac, like all the Jews are gone or whatever, like something like that. Whereas if a parent decides I don't want to adopt a baby who's disabled, right? It seems like they don't want all disabled babies to not get adopted. They just don't personally want to adopt a disabled baby. So how am I missing you? I'm probably straw manning you, but I don't know how yet. So help me understand.
I guess I look at eugenics again in a macro way. Eugenics could include racism, ableism, sexism, all of those things. So again, intent matters.
Yeah.
So does eugenics mean I need an entire group wiped out? I don't think it does. Okay. I think it means I'm going to exclude you from valuable human being, whether that's personally to me or as a whole. Like anybody like you, I will not adopt this type of person because of this characteristic they have. Right. I think that's eugenics. I won't implant an embryo because this type of thing. I think that's eugenics. Got it. So I'm going to abort because this characteristic, that's eugenics to me. Now, whether it's ableism, sexism, racism, I don't know. But it all follows to me under a macro eugenics.
Under that category. Yeah. Okay. I'm tracking with you.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sure I'm ticking off a whole bunch of people too.
Me too.
Again, adoption meant to serve the bio and adoptive parents. Adoption has very little to do with consent of the child.
Right.
Child cannot consent to this, which has something in common with abortion. The child cannot consent to that. Right. And I think that's something that the pro-life community does not talk about, is the child is not consenting to this happening and has no voice in this happening. And unlike the foster care system where there's usually a guardian ad litem or an attorney speaking on behalf of the child, there is nobody representing the child in adoption.
With newborn adoption specifically. Right. What would an attorney in that situation do? Like, what would be the role, if he's in a similar role, let's say you've got the same attorney, like this is like all he does. And so sometimes he's serving to, be the voice for a 10-year-old who's getting adopted. And in this case, but then also just society has changed in such a way that sometimes he also is speaking on behalf of the newborn who's about to be getting adopted out. Like, what are the kinds of things that he could bring from his experience with 10-year-olds that would help him to advocate well for a newborn who obviously isn't able to understand what is going on?
I actually don't think it could be an attorney. I think it would have to be a societal shift and how we look at children's rights. So what I would propose is legal guardianship rather than adoption. Legal guardianship leaves the door open for, at some point in the future, should the bio parents be in a position that they're safe and want their child back, and the child also wants that back, there could be reunification happening. And I know that freaks out a lot of people.
So I was like, okay, it was time to answer the question that everyone just had in their head, right?
Yeah.
We're going to do this a lot today, Robin.
Okay.
But what are you talking about? You're saying after at 10 years old, if the kid's 10 now, and now finally the bio parents are in this more healthy place or whatever, isn't that going to be what traumatizes the child, is to suddenly, oh, you've got new parents now. We're moving you from like you've grown up seen as your parents to suddenly these strangers, but are actually your bio parents, or at least your bio mom, adopting you. Like, that's freaking a lot of people out right now. Yeah. Let's talk.
So I think people hear these things and it's black and white. Like one day you're with adoptive parents, next day you're with, it doesn't have to look like that.
Great point. That is a good point.
It can be over years. I actually know a woman who was roommates with another woman who was going to prison, and she had just had a baby. I think the baby was about 1. And she did a legal guardianship for 6 years while the bio mom was in prison. The bio mom got out. Took about a year or 2 to get her life in order. There was lots of visitations back and forth. And then bio mom and child wanted to reunite. Legal guardianship mom said, go in peace. They still see each other. Yeah. There's still relationship. I think it comes down to who owns the child, or can children be owned?
Yeah.
And that's something I'm not comfortable with. Even my own bio children, do I own them?
It feels weird that there are laws where, like, functionally, like, at least my understanding is like they're defined sort of like property, and that is
Well, if you look at embryo adoption, it is a property transfer.
That is very much a property transfer.
Yeah. So it's human beings being owned, and I have a problem with that. And now I used to think that legal guardianship should be the only answer, and adoption should never happen. I got some pushback from adults that were in foster care that said to me, I don't want attachment to my bio family. It was that hard, that traumatic. I don't want their name attached to me. I wanted to be adopted and have a change of name, I just want that entire part of my life cut out. So I do think that, again, we have to look at children's rights. And at some point, like, what age are they capable of making those decisions? I don't have an answer for that yet, so I'm super not helpful there.
Right, but, at a policy level at least.
Right, at a policy level.
You're at least suggesting our society have a discussion that I don't feel like is really happening right now either, which is very interesting. But the case that you brought up where, there's this family, bio mom was in jail, and it took a few years for her to get her life in order. And then there's this legal guardian, and there's this kid, and it's like they've been meeting in the process. That kind of helps it get away from this like binary, like suddenly, boom, tomorrow you're with a stranger. So I agree that helps. But another thing that helps in that situation that maybe makes it more simple than some of the situations that people are concerned about is, in that case, all 3 of the people have like aligned goals and like what they want. So let's make it more complicated now. Like, what if the bio mom wants the kid and the legal guardian wants the kid, and at this point it's been a few years, and the legal guardian maybe just disagrees about whether the bio mom is in a healthy enough place? Like, how do we deal with that?
I feel like you're asking me to be Solomon.
Maybe, I don't want to, but yeah.
I think that's where, how do we legislate this, right? And that's where you have to have an attorney for. I think that's where attorney for the child is helpful at that point of like discerning what the child feels most comfortable with, what the child wants, how the child perceives both homes. Ideally, I would love, and maybe I'm an eternal optimist, but I would love to live in a world where both parents were like, we just want as many people loving this child as possible. So why don't we allow child with bio parents, because I think children have a right to their biological heritage, and have them still be in relationship with their adoptive family who's loved them for this long. Like, that would be beautiful if that's what we could all aim for.
Yeah.
But I think whenever I hear, but I want them, to me, that goes back to our children property.
Yeah. And are you placing the child's interest as number one versus your own, which can get really messy there?
Right. I mean, parents that are divorced do this all the time. Not as far as like they're mine, they're yours, but transverse this terrain all the time.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So when you talk then about like here's a case where the child should have like an attorney representing the child also. Like, I think in my head, the way I've understood this as someone who's never gone through like a family law process or something like that, is that like the legal guardian's got an attorney, bio mom's probably got an attorney, and then like the judge is in the role often of like trying to figure out what would be best for the kid. And what I hear you saying is, yes, that's still what the judge should be primarily concerned about, but there can still be something lost if the child doesn't also have an attorney who's kind of this neutral, but also like understanding, like, why should the child have the attorney and not just the judge be the one who's adjudicating what is best for the child? Maybe
because the judge's job isn't to speak what the child would say; it's to hear what the child would say.
Okay, and you might need an attorney to do that. The best. Okay, that makes sense.
Guardian ad litems meet with the children. They go and have conversations. That would be inappropriate for a judge to do outside of a courtroom.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, there needs to be a third party.
This is like really important also for pro-life people to understand, just because this is a really common confusion that comes up in our conversations with pro-choice people, where I'll be on campus talking to someone who basically thinks that adoption and foster care are all the exact same thing. And because they've heard that there's problems with the foster care system, whatever it is that they are believing about that, they also believe it's like we really need abortion just so we can prevent kids from getting thrown into the foster care system and abuse. And so then I end up finding myself in a place where I've got to try to do like a 60-second adoption 101 for this person. Like these are two really different things. And so speak to, just real quick back on the foster care thing. So like I feel like foster care has gotten a really bad rap in our society, at least evidenced by the fact that I have so many pro-choice people telling me about all the abused foster kids. So I don't know how much of that is fact versus like, there's been a lot of like movies and things like that with like some poor abused foster kids. So can you talk a bit about how often abuse does happen in foster homes? I know that I have heard, you know, just the mere fact that a foster parent can get a check from the government once a month to help pay for supplies and things can lead some bad actors to, I'm going to bring on more kids than I can really deal with, but I want all these different checks. And so then abuse is more likely in that situation than newborn adoption, because those parents are probably coming from a different place than the worst end of the spectrum on foster parents. So fact versus fiction, like, you know.
Okay, I don't have numbers or stats. Are there foster parents who game the system? Absolutely.
Okay.
Those aren't foster parents, though, that are like getting those checks and then supplying for those children.
Right.
So if you have anybody coming in from the outside to work with them, it's pretty easy to see, like, your child does not have appropriate size clothing.
Yeah.
They don't have toothbrushes. This is kind of a
losing
problem.
a lot of weight.
Right.
I thought they're supposed to be getting fed with this money. Yeah.
And I see you have a new car. Yeah, there's ways you can kind of catch these things.
Yeah.
And this kind of works in the welfare system too. But this is where I think it's a problem to have federal government running these programs, and I'm not sure you want to go into that. As opposed to local,
no,
right?
That makes sense.
And it does. I mean, like it filters down, but it filters down with so many people in between, and the laws being created federally versus locally, kind of a problem there with knowing. But more often than not, in the cases I worked, I saw foster parents really trying to help care for the kids and could not get them what they needed because the checks aren't huge.
Yeah.
And it's by area, but ours was like $100 a month. My kids cost more than
$100 a month?
Yes. So
yeah, as a parent, I can say it costs more than that.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. So we were often using nonprofits to help fill the needs that they weren't getting from the government, which I, in general, tend to think that people meet needs better than government does because they can be on the ground and see what the needs are and what's happening. But I think it's harmful to point fingers at, like, it's the foster parents, it's the government, it's the bio parents. Like, no, there's issues plenty to be spread around that we need to address. Yeah. There is abuse in foster care. It does happen. Yeah. I don't have a number on it. Right. And I think we need to talk about how do people get approved for foster care. In my state, it's like a couple hour classes and a couple interviews and you're done.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a lot.
It's not a lot. If you're going to do trauma-informed foster care, so a kid we know are coming from a traumatic situation, it's more intense than that. More recently, I've had clients of mine who were seeking to foster because they were dealing with infertility, and the agency they went through, which was not a government agency, it was a separate agency that helps foster care parents, that agency asked for, A, you need therapy to happen. B, I need a letter from your therapist talking about what your goals were, how they were accomplished, so we can make sure the reason you're doing this isn't to replace some wound in you. And that was beautiful, how that was all done. And it wasn't from a, like, we think you're bad people that are just trying to, like, use this child in a horrible way. Right. It was, we want to make sure you are healthy and you're whole, and then we can move forward with helping somebody else who needs to be healthy and whole.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So if you could in a kind of putting your cards on the table kind of a way, list, and so a little bit of this will inherently be review because you've already, I think, mentioned a few, but can you list, if you became the benevolent dictator of America or of the adoption system, and you got to here's you're not anti-adoption, but you think that there should be some adoption reform and foster care reform, perhaps, what are kind of at least the main things, the main reformations that you would like to see happen in adoption?
Newborn adoption?
Yes.
Okay. First, I think I would want to change how biomothers are approached. And this is not to point out any particular agencies. There are agencies that do it really, really well. But are all of her needs and concerns met, or at least identified with resources that can be identified? So if she wants to parent, she can.
How do we optimize her already kind of tricky situation so that we really know whether or not she can parent or not?
Right. This kind of gets into why I don't think adoption should be offered to a woman outside of a clinic ever. Because the way I think that's heard is, no, you're right, you can't parent, which is what we don't like about the pro-choice side or the adoption side. Right. You can't parent. You need adoption. You need abortion.
Right.
Yeah, no, you can't parent. Let's take this child and give it to somebody else who can. And I think that's really harmful overall to both her well-being and what it speaks of what the child's needs are. Might
affect how she feels about her next pregnancy, too.
Right. Yeah, it's not good. Yeah, so I would reform it so, are we meeting the woman's needs first societally? Are we figuring that out? If at the end of the day, she's still I just don't want this kid. No, I don't think we should force her to keep it. Now, whether or not you do legal guardianship or adoption at that point will really depend on her. We cannot force people, I think, into parenting. We just can't do that.
Right.
So I would hope we could do some kind of legal guardianship thing and work it around so this child can have as many loving adults in their life as possible. Right. But if she's outright refusing...
Right. That doesn't sound like that situation at that point anyway.
Right. Which is kind of where I'm at with adoption. The only time I ever think it's the best option is when the bio parent is absolutely refusing to have anything to do with the child or is so, I shouldn't even say so, is physically dangerous or harmful to the child consistently and they aren't responding to any kind of assistance. Yeah, we need to cut ties at that point. However, I don't think we need to cut knowledge about biofamily. So that was, and we're seeing a huge reformation already in the adoption industry about closed adoption, kids having no records. It was super harmful to kids trying to figure out where they're from, who they're from, medical record, medical history, all of that. So I think they need access to that. And I think that's a problem where a lot of people confuse visitation with finances. You can cut financial rights off, but and still have visitation or vice versa. The state of Indiana, the two are separate. So if a parent doesn't pay child support, they can still do visitation. So a lot of people think it's all in the same. So if we cut off parental rights, kids don't have any access. I think they need access to their records, for example.
Yeah, I feel I mean, even in TV shows that are depicting, kids who've gone through foster care or through adoption as they're growing up and are starting to want to find their bio family. I feel like I'm seeing through Hollywood some kind of a recognition that it can be really, really hard on a child who gets to the point where they want that. Maybe they didn't before, but now they want that, and then to have a really hard time being able to find it in spite of maybe. And I feel like you see a storyline a lot, maybe the adoptive parents are feeling defensive or concerned about the kid wanting that, but the kid's I want, but by kid, it could be an adult at this point. But just saying I just want to know. So if it feels like there is some kind of relatively recent reformation kind of happening in the way that people are thinking about that, why do you think it took this long?
I think probably because historically we've looked at adoption as those are unworthy people to have their children. These are worthy people to have their children. Yeah. The children need stability and stuff. And so this is where they can get that. So we're just going to cut them off from where they can't.
Just that black and white thing.
Just that black and white thing again. Yeah. And it's like top down versus bottom up rights. What are the parents' rights? Top down. They have the right to this child. Therefore, they get to dictate everything that happens to this child and all information that gets to this child. Or bottom up, what rights does the child have to their biological parents?
Yeah.
And that's where I come from, which as a parent is terrifying when I think about, like, am I giving my rights to my children away?
Yeah.
Like, no, it's not black and white. There is nuance in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think children have a right to know, and if all possible, be with their biological family.
Yeah. So sidewalk counselors, going back to sidewalk counselors that have an inclination and instinct to bring up adoption, at least sometimes, I imagine something that happens, I mean, just like even without wanting it to, but just like a natural instinct sometimes is just to look at the person that you're talking to and make some kind of internal judgment call that this person is at least not the most healthy option for parenting the child that the sidewalk counselor is trying to help save. What would you say to the sidewalk counselor sometimes has that kind of snap judgment? Do you think that that they should try to like withhold all of those judgments, or like just like what would you say to that person?
So I actually don't think that's probably what they're thinking.
Okay.
I think what they're thinking is, I want to give this woman an out from crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the thing that's going to make her feel not in crisis anymore? I think the way that's perceived on the pro-choice side is like this fetus fetish, where I'm just super focused on don't kill your baby, don't kill your baby, don't kill your baby. But I really think it's how do I help you feel like you're not in crisis anymore?
Yeah.
And I'm open to like you parenting, absolutely. But like, what's the thing that's going to make you today walk away from this clinic?
Yeah.
So I want to give you an out.
Yeah.
And so I'm really bad at judging anybody, really. So I don't think that sidewalk counselors are like, oh, no, you're poverty-stricken, you're Black, you're whatever, you can't parent. But I do think that's how it's heard from the other side.
Yeah, that's really important.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think in general, they're just like, how do we make you feel less in crisis?
So if you're right, I don't know if you're right, but if you're right that sidewalk counselors are kind of always like, when they bring up adoption, it's kind of like, just like, here's maybe a way, in theory, you'd think a simple way to save your baby is like, look, did you know there's a third option? You've probably never heard of it, but there's this adoption thing going on. If you're right, that's what's usually going on, then just hearing not just how this is being like coming across to pro-choice people, but how it comes across often and likely to the birth mom or the bio mom is like really important, because they just understand, okay, yeah, I understand you mean well, but the bio mom hears something like, I want to buy your baby or something like that. They're hearing it differently than what you're trying to communicate. Right.
And this is where I'm going to tick off a whole bunch of people again.
There we go.
But I think abortion in the case of poverty or domestic violence or lack of education is coercive in and of itself. Because you have these issues, rather than changing society to address these issues, we're going to give you this option. I think that is coercive. I think it's the same with adoption. Because you have these issues going on, we're going to give you this, give up your baby, rather than deal with these issues. That's coercive to me.
Okay, so now respond to the pro-life conservative, the fiscal conservative, who is hearing you say that basically we need to put a lot more money into something like welfare so that people aren't in poverty and so they don't feel coerced into an abortion because of their financial situation. Like there's a lot of assumptions in there, but I think those assumptions are happening. So
I'm sure
react
they are.
to them.
Okay, first of all, the welfare system sucks. So
common ground.
Yeah. So, no, I don't want to. And I don't think government is the answer. I look at every single thing government does, and not necessarily that it's government's intention, but the way it trickles down to the person getting the resources is just super not helpful.
We're not very effective.
We're not effective.
Yeah.
And I look at people on the ground in the locales coming up with solutions. And I think there's ways government can support that without necessarily taxing everybody to death. So I'll give you some out-of-the-box examples. Cool. I don't know why we can't have tax breaks for universities that do some kind of program where students in early childhood development for class credit run a free daycare clinic for other students on campus. why isn't there some kind of tax break for that?
Yeah.
Seems like everybody wins. Nobody's taxes go up.
Yeah.
Love that idea.
Yeah. Me too.
Or something like in my own town, I am working on creating a walk-in mental health clinic for parents because the way the mental health system is set up is really prohibitive to somebody who I have to transfer 4 buses to get to the clinic and try to be at my therapy appointment on Tuesdays at 11. And what if I have a job interview the day before and I can't, like, it's just really not set up well for people to access care. Whereas in a walk-in clinic, you come when you can come. But I mean, there's all kinds of regulations I don't want to get into. It would take days. But I think we get to be the answer to what do we do about this instead of,
Right.
no, I just don't want to fund the government. I don't think they're effective. But how can I be the answer? So I look at like, is your church the church that when anyone gets pregnant, I don't care their age or their marital status, are you the church that instead of pointing out the sin, which has already happened,
Right.
possibly, it could also be a case of rape.
Right.
Are you the church that rallies around that mother and says, we're going to take care of you and your baby as long as it takes?
Yeah.
Period.
Yep.
And you don't have to be a member of the church if you're a member of our community. How are we going to do that?
Yep. Or are we a different kind of church?
Right.
So I don't know how much. I don't know how familiar you are with an article that I read a couple of years ago about exactly that, about trying to get pastors to actually make a commitment that a couple of times a year they're going to make an announcement that is something like, if someone gets pregnant in the future out of wedlock in our church, here is how we as a church are going to handle that situation. Because I want the women who are going to be pregnant in the future to know that their church is not one of the scary ones where women are mistreated. And I'm not even saying that happens a lot anymore. It certainly has in the past. And I've interviewed several women who became pregnant in churches decades ago and were basically forced to apologize to the entire church on Sunday morning for having premarital sex and no one's talking to the boyfriend. Like that happens. That has happened. But I don't think it happens a lot right now. But it's like, look, if she doesn't know how your church responds, if your church is going to be this really caring, loving, like we're gonna take care of you guys. We hate abortion. We love babies. Like that kind of thing. What if that kind of spread across the country? What if would we have fewer Christian abortions?
I would like to push that even further.
Yeah.
And say, what if as churches grow, which is wonderful, rather than looking at how we're going to expand our building or our parking lot or whatever, in these $1 million projects, what if we buy a warehouse on a different part of town where people don't have access to us, and our congregation sometimes is here getting fed and sometimes is there feeding. And we can expand our congregation in 2 locations and they can
doing what in the warehouse?
Providing meals, providing childcare, and again, there's all kinds of regulation. My own church that I was attending, we were trying to figure out how to do childcare for women in the neighborhood, and just that in itself is mind-boggling, the loopholes you have to jump through. But there are ways to get it done. So how do we become the place where people get fed, literally and figuratively, and grow our congregation? There's ways to do that. So,
as someone who pays attention to the way that kind of Christian leaders are talking about, there is certainly a segment of Christian thought leaders who are on that track, who are like, look, the church is going to look different, or is going to need to look different in 20 years if we want to stay relevant, and being better at serving our local communities is going to be a part of that. And exactly how that looks, who knows? But I that is certainly being talked about by at least some people. I don't know how many people just going to church know that, but that is certainly, I think, a positive thing being debated.
Yeah, I think when I think about my town, we have churches that have sister churches where they kind of partner with a church in the inner city. But I see a lot of funding, but not a lot of manpower or talent transferred over. And that's harder ultimately to give, I think, your time and your talent than your money. So I think that's asking people to step out of what do you think tithing means and how do you implement that? And there is a saying that I think is true, that 20% of the people in churches do 80% of the work. So how do we tap in to the unused work?
Yeah. I mean, theoretically, if people got the 80% that aren't doing a lot of the stuff got more excited about some of the ministry opportunities, some of those people might be willing to jump in because they can actually see, okay, we are helping real people, like, or something like that, versus maybe they're just not excited to jump on the production team or whatever. And that isn't nothing I'm on my church's production team. Like, I get it. Like, there's value to that. But maybe some people get extra excited about that kind of like, I want to get out in the world and go to help people. Again, churches do that sometimes. I'm just saying. Like,
yes.
There could obviously be more of that.
There's actually a survey churches can do on identifying your giftings. And I think that could be really helpful to figure out who plugs in where. And I don't think all churches do this, but several that I've attended tend to always go to the same people. And they're always people that have multiple young children to like lead Sunday school. And those people are like, I'm leading Sunday school Monday through Saturday. And I just want to be in congregation on Sunday. So like how—
I identify with that personally. I'm like, I don't want to be teaching Sunday school.
Right. Or can we spread it out amongst more people? But I think churches can be the answer. I think secularly nonprofits can be the answer. I have some concerns about how nonprofits have to run. People have asked me, why don't you just start a nonprofit to do this mental health clinic? Well, because I would be spending 100% of my time running the nonprofit and fundraising rather than doing the work. And that's just not what I want to be doing or helpful to anyone. So how do we manage those? So I remain for profit, but I don't make a profit.
Right.
So there's a whole bunch of people are doing that work. I'm not a nonprofit, but I don't make profit.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely know that there are things that we would be doing a lot more at ERI if we had the funding to be able to do it. And I am just not spending the kind of time fundraising that nonprofit CEOs typically are. Like, you're supposed to spend like 40 to 60% of your time fundraising. And I just don't. I'm just not going to do that. It's maybe 5 or 10. But it's like I want to do the work, and if people get excited about it, awesome! Please fund us. We could really use it. But okay, so we said we were going to talk about newborn adoption versus foster care versus abortion. We've talked a lot about adoption and foster care. What is it that you want to say about abortion before we wrap up?
Okay, so we talked about foster care. The intent is to reunite the family. Adoption, the intent is to dismantle biofamily, create new adoptive family. Abortion, the intent is to end family. And really, I mean, on an emotional level, that is not true. And I want to acknowledge that. Like, my son would be 20. I still very much feel emotionally connected to him. We talk about him in our family, and we have certain things that keep him close emotionally. But on a physical level, family is ended. Right. And that's kind of the goal. Now, I know from a pro-choice perspective, no, the goal is to end crisis. And I don't want to discount that there is some relief there with that. But there are multiple ways to do that. This way guarantees no family. Yeah. So also, it's meant to serve the birth mother, but is it actually serving the birth mother? And just as a matter of example, not any way statistical, with my own abortion story, I went to the clinic seeking STD treatment. I was homeless and I was an addict and I was in an abusive relationship. They were aware of all of that. No services were offered, period. Just they did treat my STD and I left with an abortion. Yeah. So are we actually serving the mothers and how we're doing it? And I think there is some room on the pro-choice side to talk about what does that actually look like. Yeah. And we can get more into that in mental health and abortion when we talk about that later. But I think pro-lifers don't talk enough about if abortion is going to be legal, what does it need to look like? Because we don't want to give any ground. Like, I just don't want it to be legal. Right. I get that, but it is, and it's happening. Right. And we don't serve women by ignoring the fact it's happening and what's being done. Right.
And frankly, like most pro-life people, like will support incremental laws that are doing things like that. Like we have, attempts at informed consent bills. I know we'll talk about informed consent bills at some point today, but we'll have things like that are meant as long as abortion is legal. Here is a way to either help women more or maybe save more lives, like convince more women that abortion's not the right option for her. Like there's all these different things. Like I feel like pro-lifers usually are fine with that. It's just maybe it comes down to what particular piece of legislation you're talking about. I don't know.
Yeah, I think pro-lifers understandably are really focused on human life lost. Yeah. And like I looked at the world clock for abortions and it's over or 1.5 million just so far this year. So I think they get focused on, like, I just don't want any more people to die.
Yeah.
And I get that.
Yeah.
I do. But they are, and we are not going to pass sweeping no abortion laws in this country anytime soon. That's just not going to happen. So I actually think it would be better to look at it from how are we addressing this on a societal level? Not that the legal stuff doesn't need to happen.
Right.
That's just not my area of expertise.
Right. But mine neither, right?
Right. So, like, yes, and I work in conjunction with, I'm not going to lie, I work in conjunction. I testify in front of Congresses, and I meet with legislators to educate them about mental health. But my goal is society. How do we make it really, really easy for women not to choose abortion?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Which is what, I feel like a lot of pregnancy centers are trying to do that, and sidewalk counselors are trying to, we should all be on the same page on that. I feel like that shouldn't be one of the controversial things that you said today.
Yeah. It is really fascinating to me how, Planned Parenthood has on their main website, PRCs are horrible. Pregnancy resource centers are horrible.
Right.
And I'm like, well, historically, there have some shady things have happened.
Yes.
But overall, wouldn't you want a woman to have all of her options?
Right. Right.
Or is it really just about one choice?
Right. And for the pro-choice people that accuse pro-lifers a lot of not caring about women, only caring about the baby, I would hope that those people would be intellectually honest enough to admit that what happened to you was wrong. That you were seen as someone who's like, well, we can get her to have an abortion, and we can help her with the STI, but we're not going we are not caring for what else is going on with Robin. How can we, even if we're not going to be the ones giving her resources on the other things, how can we even point her to other resources out there? The fact that it wasn't done at all, I would hope that a lot of pro-choice people would be disgusted by that.
The common responses I get are either, you're absolutely right, that shouldn't happen, but no, you're not allowed to use your voice to talk about abortion.
Why?
Because it's just your one situation, and that doesn't happen to other people.
It's just an anecdote, and it must just be you. It's not a whole bunch of other people. Yeah, right.
I did have one pro-choice advocate who basically accused me of either lying or being completely unaware of what was happening in my body at the time, and that it was actually a miscarriage.
Oh, my goodness.
And then other pro-choicers some others have just said, you're just the gaslighting. You're wounded and you're lashing out. Actually, Dr. Leah Torres, an abortionist on Twitter, basically said you need mental health therapy. There's something wrong with you because you regret your abortion, which is not helpful to women seeking or having had them. Yeah. So I do have a few wonderful pro-choice friends who are very dear to me that keep me honest and also acknowledge no, that should not be happening. We need to look at reform. But they will say, anytime I talk about, should we talk about how abortion is happening? Is there any coercion going on? The very loud abortion industry movement, they're kicked off their island, period. And Dr. Debbie Garrett just wrote a book. It just came out called Alarmist Gatekeeping, and it's kind of about this whole topic of how do we control language and rhetoric and to keep people from questioning the status quo. So even pro-choicers that question things that are happening get kicked off the pro-choice island.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So it seems like basically you have hard things to say to both pro-life and pro-choice people.
Yes.
This is the kind of person I'm very interested in. I just say I find you very, very intriguing.
Thank you.
So I'm really glad we talked about this. People can feel free to email us the things that they disagree with. I might forward some to you.
Awesome.
But it's at least the kind of conversation that we ought to be that we ought to be having. Whether or not you agree with every single thing Robin has said today, at least we're talking about it because people are not talking. I've never talk to anyone about some of these things that you've brought up today. So I just value you for being willing to think outside the box and being willing to say hard things to both sides because there's an intrinsic intellectual honesty that comes with that. And it's also really hard to say things that are going to get you a lot of hate mail. So I just appreciate you having the courage to come on and say these things publicly. So hopefully we can get more conversation going on.
I really appreciate constructive feedback. I will be honest, if anybody out there wants to send me hate mail, you can. I will ignore it. I'm not going to address it. But if you have constructive feedback or you have a lived experience that's different, I want to hear it because that's where I got to this point. I've been rigidly pro-choice.
Yeah.
And I've been really rigidly, probably harmfully pro-life. And I got here because people on both sides pushed back against and taught me a lot about women's experiences. So
interesting.
yeah, give me all the constructive feedback.
How would you want the constructive feedback people to get in touch with you?
Robin at Truth Agape on Twitter. My DMs are open.
Okay.
God help me.
For now, at least.
For now, yes.
Thanks so much for being on, Robin.
Thank you for having me.